And so let me just launch right into it. Again, Carol shared that, this is the talks, Zen of Starting at the Startup. It's a series of stories I've compiled over the years. And I don't know about you all, but I reached this magic moment in my career where, I'd be spouting off different things, but I just, maybe about five years ago, people actually started to listen. I'm like, holy cow, how did that happen? So I'm going to share a few of my stories. Let me just get right into it. The first slide is probably the most important of the whole presentation. This is the Zen part. When everyone clear their minds, be mindful and be present. That's a lot about what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with a quote, and this is also a Zen part, from a legendary samurai named Miyamoto Musashi during the Warring States in the Tokugawa period in Japan around 1600. And he was also a Zen philosopher after he had like 60 bouts and he survived them all. It takes 1,000 days of practice for discipline. Note, it's not 1,000 hours, as some people might want you to believe, but it's 1,000 days. And it's 10,000 days of practice for mastery. And it's very carefully worded as mastery, not expertise. Because in the things I get involved with, as soon as you think of yourself as an expert, your mind actually starts closing down. It starts closing, but it is really the journey to continue to learn more and take them forward. So 10,000 days, if you do the math on 250 working days a year, it actually translates to 40 years. I was like, oh, I guess that's me. So here's a bit about my 10,000 day journey in the working world. And I grabbed a bunch of logos of clients, companies I work with and for, experiences. So it goes all the way from the top left with my paper route in New Rochelle, New York, finds its way meandering down to different schools, different professions, aerospace engineering, financial services, and then to the bottom right, where now I'm at CLA, running the life sciences practice for the company. Like little sidebar, CLA is the 8th largest consulting, outsourcing, and accounting firm in the country. 120 offices. We've got some mass. We've got 8,000 people. But I think what's really interesting and fun is being able to bring that focus into the life sciences area and resources to help people basically start up and run their companies. Rhode Island Bio is the newest logo on the chart up on the right. So, Carol, thanks for the opportunity to put your logo on my infographic. Okay, so today's talk, I'm going to draw stories from the 10,000 days, and it's organized like this. Start with your great idea, keep your peace of mind, go lean or go home, not go big or go home, show me the money, lead your team, and keep your Zen. So starting with a great idea, I'm going to draw a story from G-Root, which Carol mentioned. We're building an AI platform to save cancer patients by finding the right targeted treatments at the right time. Emphasis on finding. We were not a therapeutic company, but we're really looking for difficult matches. And we started with only idea. It goes like this. Folks who have been in and around Cambridge might recognize Area 4, the coffee shop right there in Tech Square. So literally a geneticist, an AI expert, and a rocket scientist, that would be me, walk into a coffee shop in Cambridge. We listen, we talk, we have two scientists that hear the idea, and lo and behold, we walk out with a biotech startup. Literally, one coffee. That's all it took. And of course, there was another senior scientist involved, so we had to bring in the fourth person. So we had a Chinese dinner in Cambridge at Mulan. And then lo and behold, we're off to the races. So the problem we were solving, it was a very complex, multi-dimensional problem. Again, it was very much information-based and expert-based. Taking genetic code and sequences from cancer patients, deciphering them, applying some AI, some smart brains, creating expert systems and machine learning, and trying to find that match from approved drugs, off-label drugs, clinical trials, And then we'd also dig into the scientific papers to find the genetic pathways for the variations. So that was all good. We started with Chinese folks because 4 of the 5 founders were of Chinese origin. Of course, we were slogging away for a couple of years and we almost gave up, literally. We were incubated out of the Harvard Innovation Lab. We were getting some traction. We saved a few lives, which is what kept us going. But we literally were about to give up. Our senior scientist, Chinese PI from Mass General, was going to China to do, basically go to cancer conferences, give a talk. And he says, hey, there's a business competition over there. Why don't I enter? Why don't we enter? And I said, okay, Schwen, this is our last chance. This is the Hail Mary. If this doesn't pan out, we're just gonna, fold up and shut down and go off do other things. But lo and behold, we won first place in this Hangzhou business competition, which came with upfront 700,000 cash prize to set up, right off the bat, US dollars, but it's to establish a Chinese company. And then ultimately turned into also an additional $3 million in economic incentives from the local district that was vying for us to be there. And so the photo of this on the upper right, left is our team out of the Harvard I Lab. We won this competition in China in the middle. When we were setting out and applying to this and we got selected as a finalist, Schwen, who's the senior scientist, says, hey, they want us there or want me there 5 days ahead of time so we can, practice for the pitch and get ready. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they've taken, one of the programs like Mass Challenge or M2D to compress 8 weeks into 5 days to get the finalists ready. So he gets over there and he sends us a WeChat and says, oh, I figured out why they wanted us 5 days early to rehearse. And I go, yeah, why? He says, they wanted to get us ready for the TV show. I'm like, what? So literally he's showing us pictures, WeChatting videos, during the finals competition. And it looks just like what it looks like. It looks like Dancing with the Stars. So a couple of investors stepped forward. Hey, we want to help you get landed, this and that. So December 2019, if you remember that date, for a number of reasons, I was literally in China signing up joint venture agreements. On the right-hand side, on the top is the incubator that we would be housed in. And on the bottom is the district, the economic district that was vying for our business, if you will. And so this is where, actually, if you look really in the center, you're focused in, there's some white buildings, that is Alibaba. And so the chair of the district, she walks in. I just liked her so much because she says, welcome to, Wuhan district. We've already picked out your office for you. It's like, this is good. She's already making the close in the second sentence. So anyway, that was pretty successful. We're feeling pretty good about it. But if you remember the date, 2019, December, that's when the first signal of COVID was showing up in Wuhan. I told my wife, don't worry, it's all safe. They're 2 provinces over. But then you know the rest of the story. So that certainly stalled us out. This is the trials and tribulations. And so we basically shelved it. For a while, we were thinking, oh, the COVID thing, that's really what's putting a damper, in how we progress here. But I said, that's the COVID cop-out. Even without COVID, it was going to be pretty hard to set this thing up in China. So, I mean, COVID happened, but it's like, okay, I don't want to cop out on this one. It was just like, it's hard. It's hard. So that's when I joined CLA. I said, okay, enough of this goofing around with startups. I'm going to see if I can have an impact on more than just one company at once. All right, keep your peace of mind. This is also a very Zen thing. I'm going to quote from one of my favorite books, and it's called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a book that came out in the 70s about a fella that actually writes, technical journals and instruction manuals. He jumps on his motorcycle from Minnesota with his kid on the back, and he drives out to Bozeman, Montana. So they get to meet, let me set the backdrop. This was a company that we stood up about 10 years ago called Good Measures. And we're literally creating a digital health app to change the way America eats, balancing nutrition. So we literally went from a PowerPoint slide deck to first revenue in 8 weeks. I got invited by one of my mentors and serial entrepreneurs to come and see the pitch deck. This was like December 1st. This is 2010. And he said, oh, this is all great. We're going to change the way America eats. We got this fancy algorithm. We're going to make this thing happen. I said, how can I help you, George? He says, well, I sold the first paid pilot. I said, well, that's good. How can I help you? He says, well, we're supposed to launch on February 1st, 8 weeks from now. I go, what? Okay, this is very exciting. Where do we stand? He says, well, you've seen the PowerPoint slide deck. And I go, yeah, George, but where do we stand? He says, oh, you've seen the PowerPoint slide deck. And I go, okay. But then he said, okay, we can deal with this. And I said, what's the flip side? We have this really sophisticated mathematical and digital algorithm that was the core of the product. I said, George, where do we stand on the technology? And he says, oh, Dan Reese is on it. Dan is a really talented computer scientist, mathematician, a PhD from Berkeley, which we've worked, George and I worked with many times. So when he says Dan's on, I go, okay, I'm starting to calm down, get more centered. And he's already building the algorithm. This is all great, going to be great technology. And I said, well, where do we stand with that, with the technology? And Dan, he goes, oh, Dan's been working on it for 4 hours. I'm like, what the heck? So I said, all right, let's go for it. So that was really, we literally grabbed that first revenue in 8 weeks with Christmas and New Year's in between. So this is where the quote from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance comes in. Oh, I keep jumping ahead. Sorry about that. A little bit more about what we're building. We're looking to answer a very complex question with a simple answer. And really the question is, given all the nutrition data, all the different kinds of things, different diets, apples are good for you, hamburgers are not. The really is, how do you take all that information and answer the question, what should I eat next? So we came up with the mathematical algorithm based on nutrition data that's really looked at 35 nutrients, not the 14 you see on the back of a box of Oreos. But okay, if we can use the USDA, US Department of Agriculture targets, then we can have some sort of algorithm, it's basically a linear program that optimized what you eat. If you need more vitamin D, then you need to squeak it up, that bar on the left. If you have too much sodium, then you need to squeak it down. So that's where all the algorithms came in. So we needed to create that and stand it up on a platform and a digital health app. So, okay, we're scurrying about to build the app, but we also have to build the company. So this is where my favorite quote comes in. From Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, the fellow who's driving the motorcycle used to teach at Montana State. They're sitting on the back porch of one of his professor buddies, and they're trying to put together a rotisserie grill. And they burst open all these parts. They look at the instruction set, and our protagonist says, the best instruction set I've ever read was for a Japanese bicycle. And step 1, assembly of Japanese bicycle require great peace of mind. So to visualize that, I pulled the instruction set from a Huffy bike, fixed gear, 700cc wheel size. So if anyone's ever built a bicycle or assembled an IKEA, desk, you've probably been through this experience. You go, what? You see all these parts, instructions, parts list, what the heck is a derailleur, that kind of thing. But here's the thing, with a bicycle, most people kind of know what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to do, how the parts fit in. You pedal the pedals, you hit the brakes, you steer with the handlebars. So you have some imagery, even firsthand experience of what the bike's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to work. Here's the thing with a business, especially as you set out or you pivot, try to create a new one, it ain't so easy. So I coined the phrase, assembly of a business requires greater peace of mind, because you've got experience at other businesses or life experiences, but the one you're about to create is all new. Keep a clear mind, stay present. So the way I decided to portray the bazillion moving parts when you start a business and you really don't know what you're going to do and need to pivot, so I literally took this screenshot of my desktop. I'm guessing many people have desktops that look like this, maybe, but literally this is my desktop really from all the files from Good Measures, and this is just maybe top two layers. We had many versions of our pitch deck. like 72 versions within a year and a half. We had private placement memorandums that we had to draft, redraft. We had our intellectual property, our patent filing. We had the design of our product, different algorithms. If you squint real hard towards the middle, you'll actually see an image of a Picasso, because we were talking about how do you create a virtual model of yourself. I even got somewhere in there receipts for coffee, because you got to have coffee if you're going to build a business. So a bazillion moving parts. Some of these we just didn't even know we would have to deal with when we started the company. The good news, so go lean or go home. This is something that I realized when we were building this business. And you hear the phrase "go big or go home." Well, maybe it's just me being a New Englander, more conservative. Well, before you get big, why don't you start lean? Figure out what's going to go on. So I'm going to tell a story from World War II, the 1940s. Again, go lean or go home, but think about not just minimum viable product, but minimum viable process. So here's a photo of ENIAC, one of the first successful mainframe computers. It was in 1943, 1944, when all this stuff was being worked on. And ENIAC was created out of UPenn, out of their, research, computer science. I don't think they even called it computer science then, between math and engineering. I think this is how computer science departments started. So at the time, this is where during World War II, and there was a race to create mainframe computers that worked, literally to create the algorithms that would feed the bomb site to the atomic bomb. So this is part of the Manhattan Project. And so there are many academic institutions and research centers working on the mainframe computer to solve that problem. Got UPenn, Harvard, Columbia, MIT, Berkeley, I think maybe UVA or Carnegie Mellon, or called something something else at the same time. So a very complex problem to really get these things to work, and then also the engineering, how to create it. So there's one of the research summits of all these institutions, and they did the math on the solution. It would take 17,000 vacuum tubes, 70,000 resistors, 10,000 capacitors, 6,000 switches, and 1,500 relays. Ironically, you can probably do all of this with 2 semiconductors. End of story. But what that meant in the old days was over 200,000 solder connections. And they did the math on that and realized, oh my gosh, it's going to take like 18 months to even just physically do 200,000 solder connections. So everyone went back and said, okay, we have to think about a different computer design to crack it. Maybe we only need 150,000 vacuum tubes, 65,000, capacitors, or whatever. So the folks went back to their ranch to figure out how to crack that with better algorithms, better computers. So they had a reconvening of the summit in a few months, and everyone showed up but the folks from UPenn. And here's why. Because the choice was elegant programming, which is where everyone went scurrying about. But what was different about UPenn, they just decided to start soldering. And lo and behold, that's what they did. And so they were the first ones to actually crack the code, literally. Instead of just going think tank on it, they just said, oh, let's grab some soldering irons and start. That part ain't going to go away. So we took that lesson into good measures. And we had the USDA nutritional information, more than meets the eye. The SR28 nutritional database, the things you don't really see, but beneath the covers, there are like 28,000 foods, 39 nutrition values that we wanted to look at. But as we looked at the data, there were like 20,000 duplicates, which meant, guess what, over 300,000 data points that needed to be scrubbed. A different story about how we got our hands on the database. And it has to do with one of our founders whose mom happened to be a US Senator from New Hampshire. So it's like, we can't get the data. So one phone call, boom, all of a sudden we get the data. So, we downloaded it onto Excel. By that time, Excel could, take a lot of entries. And we looked at it and go, holy moly, even see the shading on the upper left. That, if I remember, is just a subset of different kinds of the same kind of milk. There's a lot of duplicates. So many ways you can define vitamin D whole milk. It's all the same nutrient values, but of course, there's so many variations in how you want to package it. So we had this choice. We had 300,000 data points to scrub. So guess what? We had the same choice: elegant programming. Chief technology officer, the PhD scientist from Berkeley, said, "Oh, I can write a, database. I can use SQL. We can scrub it." And I said, "Oh, Dan, that sounds great. How long will that take?" He says, "Well, this is a fairly straightforward process once we get the scrubbing algorithm, but we still have to program it, test it, dedupe it, QC it at the end." He says, "Oh, about 3 to 4 months." I go, "Oh, well, that's interesting." So I said, "Well, maybe there's a different way to do it." So what I did, I grabbed, I think, 58 values of whole milk, all the same stuff. And I said, "Okay, let me just get a cup of coffee, crank up some rock music in the background, and see how long it takes to scrub 57 entries." And, I'm not even a nutritionist. And it took about maybe 45 minutes once I figured out how to crack it. And I said, "Oh, that wasn't so bad. Didn't kill me." So I did a little math. I said, "Hey, I think we can do this manually." So I got into this wrestling match with the CTO. And I said, "Yeah, so why don't we try that?" So I said, like, we had nutritionists on our staff. So let's break it into 2 piles. Cassandra, you take steak. And then Kristen, you take butter. And see how long it takes. And so fast forward the tape, we just started scrubbing. And we took 11 days, not 3 to 4 months, to clean it, all the entries. We got to 7,000. So we got actually 11 days, something pretty usable. Again, we're creating the minimum viable product. At the same time, we said, okay, how can we get the process done? You switch gears, show me the money. Folks who are in the startup world or even just launching a new business line probably go through this one, which was, where's the revenue going to come from? And so I walk in one day to Good Measures. Just so you know, the founder CEO was one of the first 3 founders of Bain & Company. Someone who I think is like the world's greatest strategist, business strategy person in the world. And he asked me, where's the revenue going to come from? What the heck? How can I answer this one? So I do this. I jump to the whiteboard and I draw the revenue wheel of fortune, just like the TV show. So we had the core invention of the digital health app that can help people eat better. And I said, oh, there's different ways we can go to market. From the top, health plans, sell to employers, other payers, go through dietitians, maybe physicians. We actually had a conversation with a cardiologist from Beth Israel, hospitals, health clubs, fitness centers, biopharma, branded diets, restaurants, fee model like Weight Watchers, or even ad models like Facebook. So because we were so early, we kept our minds open to the different possibilities. For folks who have ever pitched to investors, they'll probably say, oh my gosh, you're trying to do too much. Oh my gosh, what are you thinking? And so we said, well, we're so early in the game, we don't know enough to eliminate anything. So let's do some pilots, go test the market. So we literally read pilots with health plan, a fitness club. We took a foray, had some conversations with fancy restaurants. On paper, we ran the ad model for individuals. Just did a quick back of the envelope spreadsheeting. And I concluded for George that we can get to 20 million in revenue. And he gets pretty excited about that for the ad model. And I go, yeah, George, all we need to do is have 100 million active users per month. He says, oh, that's all. This is like, when you do exercises like this, at least I found, you have to put on a little bit of the entrepreneur's arrogance.
Yeah,
you got to believe you can do it. Otherwise, why the heck would you even try?
That closet, is that locked?
So we ended up, Alex, I think Alex, if you can put yourself on mute, that'd be great. Yeah. So we ended up going to market through health plans and with a focus on type 2 diabetes and helping folks with that. The other question that came up was competitive strategy. Who will your competition be? And so I netted out pretty quickly, and this is maybe the wise guy of me. I worked and I grew up on the streets of the Bronx, so there's a little bit of street smarts. So who will the competitors be? Well, it's pretty simple. Anyone whose revenue we take. I mean, plain and simple. Just think about the money. And so when we thought about that wheel of fortune, we also said, well, here's what it would take in terms of product and distribution. But, who do we want to invoke competition from? If we went for weight management programs and we did a fee for service model, well, we'd be facing off with Weight Watchers and Oprah. I'm like, oh, I don't think we want to do that today. So we would scurry back based on some really plain, simple questions like whose revenue will we take? We can go through all sorts of esoteric, Bain level, McKinsey level studies, but we said, okay, let's do the quick version. Who's going to hurt the most? The good news is we got through all that and we got to an over, $10 million pre-money valuation. It was actually more like 18 in less than 24 months. So we raised some good money. Good Measures is doing pretty well. Value right now is about, I think, 150 million, privately held, some venture money, all that sort of stuff. So not too bad, but a lot of bumps along the way, put it that way. Pivoting, and getting close to the end. I inserted this chapter, if you will, about pivoting, because many of us will face that, either shifting the strategy and entering a new market, or starting a new venture, within one. So I'm going to tell a story of a pivot that I got involved with, and this was not quite 40 years ago, but 9,000 days ago, maybe a few lower than that. And this was a company that I was worked at called Oxford Instruments. And Oxford, spawned out of Oxford University in England, was in the business of creating and cranking out superconducting wire, very high tech material, niobium titanium, for anyone who cares, where the way electrons flow through it is pretty frictionless. You cool it down with liquid helium, which is 3 degrees above absolute zero. And what it does, it suppresses all sorts of, the physics of it, the friction. So electrons, you charge it up and the wire stays charged up for like a long time, more than you'd think. And so the first applications of the factory and the product was for high energy physics, like cyclotrons, wire that would end up at the Fermi Labs or Brookhaven. But there was a big pivot to medical diagnostics. So it's really taking old physics and bring it into new medicine. So on the left is a picture of the Brookhaven cyclotron from the 50s, I think. But that would be a customer. Miles and miles of wire that get wrapped around this big circle. And literally, so you can shoot high energy particles and split the atom and see what the heck's in there. So the shift was to MRI, machines, magnetic resonance. So we would make the magnets that GE would create MRI machines from. And so the real conversion and pivot was from really big science projects to essentially a product environment. Big ticket items. These things were, I think, $250,000 in 1983 dollars. So pretty expensive stuff. But it was more shifting to a production operation. So, yep, I don't think this is our factory in Oxford, but this is how magnets are made. It's a factory environment, not super clean like you'd find at NASA or anything like that. So I ran the floor for materials management. And the fellow who ran the shipping dock reported to me. And so I walk into work one day, minding my own business, and Frank Bird, who actually looked like Big Bird, walks up to me and says, "Boss, the spooks are back." And I go, "Yeah, the spooks are back. What does that mean?" He says, "Oh yeah, the folks from the CIA." I'm like, "What? What? The folks from the CIA?" He goes, "Yeah, they came up from Langley. They brought magnetic disk drives from their hard drives, and they came up to erase the magnets, erase the hard drives, where they literally would take that big hard drive and put it into a magnet, at that time was about 2 Tesla, 20 times the strength of the Earth's magnetic field, and just basically erase the tapes, the hard drives. So there's like 4 semi-trailers backed up into the loading dock, and literally they're bringing off these hard drives and putting them into the magnets that have been ramped up and just erasing them. It doesn't take long, just hold it there for a few minutes. They pretend that it took 2 minutes, but it didn't really, it took seconds, and they'd put them back in the trailer. And so there's all these CIA dudes walking around, with, they don't look like they're in the movies. Let's put it that way. They're pretty nondescript looking people. But I said, Frank, you said that they're back? What does this mean? He says, well, they were here last year and they got smarter. I go, what do you mean they got smarter? He says, well, this year they left their guns in the car. So what happened the year before was they walked in this, highly magnetized factory with like 10 or 15 magnets lined up, and their guns started getting yanked out of their shoulder holsters. Like, this can't be happening. I'm just trying to do my job and go to work. But, again, the pivot business side sounds really good, but these are the crazy things you run into along the way. The net of it is no one got hurt. There were some other factory accidents, but that's a whole nother story. So I'm going to switch gears into leadership. A few lessons I picked up along the way. Lead your team. Creating a sense of mission, I think is personally pretty important, especially if you're slugging it out through a startup or a new venture, where you go through some dismal times or just really hard days at work. So having a sense of mission, I think, is important. You see in actually, there's a story. I grew up in the 60s, 70s with the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo missions to the moon. There's a story about President Johnson walking through what at the time was called Cape Kennedy Space Center. And he's walking up and down. There's a whole entourage, Secret Service, the head of NASA, the Governor of Florida. They're all hosting President Johnson. And he walks by this fella at a desk. And it's pretty obvious he's a accountant, kind of like you'd find at CLA. But he's got his name tag and it's Charlie. And so President Johnson walks up to him and says, hey, Charlie, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm President Johnson. Nice to meet you. Charlie looks up. Very nice to meet you, Mr. President. And LBJ asks him, what do you do here? And he looks up at him. Charlie looks up and says, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon. Here he is, just, doing the bookkeeping, but says, nope, I'm here to put a man on the moon. So that sense of mission is something that I've learned the hard way sometimes, is really important to instill in folks. That's why you saw it in Good Measures. Our mantra was change the way America eats. For GROOT, it was really help people with cancer so that we can help make cancer go away. At CLA, we've adopted a mission. This maybe draws it back into accounting. And certainly in life sciences, our reason we're here is to help companies save lives. If we can take things off the plate so they can focus in on keeping people alive and well, the science, the technology, the commercialization, but you still need, pretty solid business infrastructure, legitimate, bookkeeping, HR, deal structure, things like that. So that's where we come in. But our mantra is really to help save lives. In terms of building a team, it's something we learned in consulting. And in consulting, I don't know if you're familiar with management consulting, but it's a road warrior job. 4 days out in the field, 1 day back at the ranch, that type of thing. So we would interview a lot of talented folks, but invariably at the end of an interview cycle, we'd regroup as an internal team. Think about talent, experience, the hard skills, but then we'd always ask the question, and we call it the 35,000 foot test. Could you see yourself on a plane for 6 hours flying to San Francisco with this person sitting next to you? Not that you have to be the same person, but is there a certain cultural aspect, fit? Would this person fit? Not that everyone has to be the same, but could you see working with this person late at night or on the plane, taking a red eye back? And so if anyone had a blink, we wouldn't immediately ding the person. but we'd probe at the ding, at the blink, and say, why? What's behind that? What's behind that? And either say, oh, we just really need a second round of interviews, or there truly is some issue, but we would just not let it go there. We would just probe deeper. Again, to be very careful. You probably all know this if being experienced folks. Culture. So important, at least as I was learning. Whether you're starting up the company or doing a pivot. And for me, I draw the analogy and I call it corporate Jenga. Handle with care. So imagine you're starting your game again, Jenga. You start laying the bricks. You try to keep pretty good alignment when you're starting. But as you go up and up and up, which is scaling, you got to also be very careful to keep culture in line, behavior, of course, the business, so that, one brick doesn't topple the whole thing. For an existing company, which I've been involved with in different startups or the pivots, it's really growing on hopefully a strong foundation. And this is where the Jenga really comes in. Some of the things you need to change, for example, I was working on a different company where I changed compensation structure. And so that's literally poking at one of those bricks, in the middle and seeing if it's going to throw the whole rest of the company off. So these are the things I kept an eye on. I've learned how to keep an eye on. I don't do perfectly every day, but really thinking about that structure. And when you're going to push one of those bricks that goes, let's go really easily and just pile on top, or hit on a brick like compensation structure or even some radical business practice change. You poke on it, the structure starts to rattle, and you say, oh, nope, scroll it back, push it back in. I'm getting close to the end here. Employee engagement. Actually, I realized that this is becoming more and more important in remote world, hybrid world, is really doing your best to reach out and touch someone every single day, somebody. As a CEO, as a founder, even as a good team member, making sure you're making those connections. I created an app. I was a CEO for a really interesting company that did lab safety consulting around here. And our consultants were mostly in client sites doing lab safety officer work. And I invented an app to stay in touch with folks. And it looked like this: piece of paper and a pencil. At the time, we had 50 employees, so it wasn't too hard. But every 2 weeks, 10 days, sometimes every 3 weeks, I'd do a printout of our whole employee roster, and then literally keep track of the dates I did the last check-in and check people off. If I felt like I hadn't seen, like, Judy Sylvester, top name, I made up the names, for a while, I'd make sure to either send her an email, do some work with her, even if I bumped into somebody in Kendall Square and had some interaction, say, okay, good, I had some interaction, done. Where did I learn this? I did not invent this, but where I picked this up along the way, anyone remember the grocery store chain called Demoulas, now called Market Basket? Well, there was a big conflict several years ago between the Demula brothers, the finance guy and Arthur, who was really the hands-on operations person. And I read about Arthur Demula. I thought, wow, this guy's fantastic, because literally he had a personal relationship with almost every single employee in the company, and he would touch base. He would send them, birthday gifts. If someone was sick in the family, he'd send them a note, things like that. And say, wow, that's fantastic. Luckily, I don't have 3,000 people to do that with. But I said, that interaction just seems so important. And so when it came time that there was this big conflict between the Demula brothers to sell or not sell, the employees went on strike. They fired, I think the brother of the board fired Arthur, the CEO. Every employee went on strike. Says, no, we need Arthur. And I'm like, my gosh, you can't buy that kind of loyalty. You just kind of make it happen. So the engagement part's pretty important. And I just created a simple tool to use. And it's easy when you have a startup because you don't have that many people. Another point on team and what's called actually the sphere of acceptable risk. again, I didn't invent this, but let's talk about what that is. I am going to take us on a short journey to the mountains. And just, my family, we are rock climbers. We've done some mountaineering. We've seen stuff, some successful, some more like near misses. But imagine yourself in the mountains and you're this dude on the lower left, and you're faced with, what's the next part of the expedition or the outing. So if you're a beginner, been out a few times, have a certain skill set, have some experience, your sphere is pretty tight in terms of your sphere's acceptable risk. Just so you know, I literally pulled this lesson out of a mountaineering book that I have. So your sphere is pretty tight. Maybe you can go up here, up to that level of the slope. Actually, this reminds me of a trip I took to Tuckerman's Ravine a bunch of years ago. So you're like, okay, within my skill set, I can go here, I can feel comfortable, and I can go home at the end of the day. If you're very experienced, been through it, seen a lot, then your sphere gets pretty large. And then putting your sights on that peak, while it might be challenged, it's not a stupid thing to do. Again, a larger sphere of acceptable risk. When I saw this in the mountaineering chart, I said, oh, and actually literally this was on the leadership chapter of mountaineering, like, oh, this is pretty powerful. But not so much one recognizing your own risk profile, but also recognizing that of other people. So if you're the leader of the expedition, like the founder of the company, the CEO, you got to be cognizant of the other people on your team, their sphere of acceptable risk. And, literally it's really just knowing where that comfort zone is and not pushing too hard out of it. And if someone reacts in a certain way, it probably a lot has to do with their sphere. This also goes with investors or venture capitalists that you might be talking to or know of, or even yourself. When I was raising money for some of the companies I was involved with, we were gung-ho, the world's going to be great. We had this big sphere of gung-ho, and then we hear pushback from investors. What about this? What about that? Too many things. What are you going to do? What's your business model? Show me your revenue from the last 3 years. And I'm like, hey, what part of we're a startup did you miss? We want to discover, we don't have any revenue model. It's all speculation. But then walking away, I said, oh, I get it. This investor has a certain mandate. They're in a certain sphere. So for pushing them out of that, while they might think it's exciting, they know within their constraints, they got to stay within their own bubble. It could work the other way too. So again, risk, it's a very personal thing. And so this is also part of the, for myself, when I have a good day, I'm, cognizant of it, no judgment. It's just who you are in terms of the other person. Clients are the same way. Okay, a couple more slides, and this is all about the Zen. And this is in competition. So I'm going to draw lessons from the dojo. Some folks know that I practice karate outside of work, but there's things that we learn in karate and about competition and sparring. And the 4 simple phrases. Japanese, it's sen, which is all about taking the advantage, taking the initiative, always going forward, no matter which direction you're going, being in, focused, but also just making that first move. Gono sen is really being present. So if someone's throwing a front kick at you or a punch, is to understand that, but you're already in, but you're making your strike as a counter strike. So it's reacting to a move, but being present enough to be calm and just do it. Sen no sen is actually recognizing a move is happening, but making your move before the opponent actually has a chance to move too far. So I'm just going to, share that if someone's coming at you with a punch, is really knowing that in those few microseconds when they're making the move, you make your move and you end it. The highest level is sen no sen. And this takes a deeper understanding of yourself and your opponent, but you sense the move, literally. before it happens. You don't know what's going to happen, but you see it, and then you make your move. So it's another level of, sharing your mind. In life, I've learned this. It's hard for me sometimes to separate one or the other because you're always the same person. Take care of your family. Probably know that one. Take care of your friends. And I learned this from my professor mentor from Tufts, brilliant structural engineer, but he's always be working. He's always working. And one of the other students said, "Hey, professor, when do you take a vacation?" And he said, "Oh, I take a vacation every day." He said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Oh, at lunch, I go run 2 miles at the track over Tufts, and then I eat my lunch, and that's my vacation of the day." Like, oh, taking a break. I think we're seeing that ourselves when we're in virtual world. You can chain to the desk, but it's actually I started doing this. I, do a bunch of laps around the house just so I can get a mile in, things like that. So getting that break, that mental break is important. I think next is the final slide. I'm going to end with a quote from someone who I think is one of the greatest Zen philosophers in the past 100 years. And it's this fella, the dude. And it's, don't mess with my Zen thing, man. He was just amazing. So that's what I got. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening. Take some questions. Got questions thrown in the chat. But I would say first, thanks to Carol for bringing us together. Appreciate it. I think Rhode Island Bio is doing some pretty special stuff. And I think Carol's a little humble, but I'm going to put a plug in. If you want to get involved with Rhode Island Bio, you know where to reach Carol. We're always looking for sponsors, for this series, or get involved with sweat equity like many of us do, but it's pretty special. So thanks a bunch. That's all I got.
It's great. Thank you.